All right, folks. So in my 8th grade social studies class, my teacher, Mr. Humble, taught me things that it turns out maybe not was always the entire truth. But after doing my own research, which they always tell me to do, I figured out it wasn't exactly the whole story. And this week, we will dive into the 159th anniversary of the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. Abraham Lincoln personally hated slavery. And by the way, Jackson, if you want to pause me during this because you want to comment on anything, just yell out, pause! Abraham Lincoln personally hated slavery and considered it immoral. He said, if the Negro is a man, why then my ancient faith teaches me that all men are created equal and that there can be no moral right in connection with one man's making a slave of another. I start with that quote. In an election with 82% turnout in which he received 0 votes in 10 states, election fraud, Lincoln won, and the Civil War promptly began because of states' rights, of course. That's all it was about, was states' rights. So about a year and a half into the states' rights war, the Union began suffering heavy losses and support for the war started to wane. Lincoln, in an effort to reestablish the Union, which was, make no mistake, his primary goal at first, said on September 22nd, 1862, that if the rebels did not rejoin the Union by January 1st, 1863, all slaves in the rebellious states would be freed. Lincoln likely would not have enforced immediate freedom for the slaves had the South complied. But as we know, much like MAGA rebels today who scream, "I will not comply" to mask mandates, the Southern rebels yelled, "I will not comply" to the proclamation. And thus, 100 days later, he kept to his word, issuing the order. I never knew that, but today is 100 days from January 1st, I guess, every year. So happy New Year's in 100 days. Lincoln's decision to issue the Emancipation Proclamation was enormous. This event, combined with the determination on the part of African Americans to flee across Union lines, framed the Civil War as what it was, a struggle for freedom of enslaved people. In practical terms, the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation was partly a military strategy and prevented European nations who had already outlawed slavery from intervening in the war on behalf of the Confederacy. And although he was at first hesitant, it enabled Lincoln and the Union to enlist 180,000 black soldiers. Lincoln didn't actually free any of the 4 million Americans held in slavery when he signed the formal EP. The document applied only to enslaved people in the Confederacy and not to those in the border states that remained in the Union, like Missouri. So while it's true that Lincoln hated slavery and issued the order, and at great consequence to himself, as he was literally murdered for it, he essentially did only half the work. The rest was done by regular, everyday citizens, both free and not. Those stories are the focus of today's Dig Big Hoss.
Eliza Potter was born in Ireland and immigrated to the Carolinas along with her husband, Lorenzo. At the start of the Civil War, Lorenzo was offered $5,000 a day. God damn. That's a lot of money back then.
That's a lot now.
That's a lot of money now.
$5,000 a day to lay mines in the harbor to aid the Confederate efforts early in the war. 5 G's a day.
And they might have done a Trump, though, and not paid the bill.
Right.
Facts. A white abolitionist, he refused. And he and Eliza remained loyal to the Union. Treated as a traitor, Eliza used her own money and materials to tend to wounded Union soldiers who were untreated by the Confederate medical community. She bribed officials and smuggled in food and supplies. And her and Lorenzo sold their family home to pay for a makeshift triage unit. Tragically, her son Frederick was mocked and bullied at school by his Confederate peers and whipped by his teachers. While going to school to collect his diploma, graduation, Frederick was attacked and bludgeoned, dying some months later. The Potters spent their entire fortune to help end the tyranny of slavery. That's deep. That's deep right there.
All right, Jackson, you want to take a stab at one of these?
Well, I have
Can you pull up your Can you pull up your Twitter messages, or you can comment on that one if you like?
In terms of my, I have some general commentary about just what I think that people can really overlook about how big of a deal emancipation really was, because I think that people don't really understand how important slavery was to the existence of the United States at all. Slavery, since the ending of it, has been spun as just kind of like an old Southern tradition that, you know, some people did and it was bad. But no, slavery was a constantly adapting and constantly evolving institution. It wasn't that, oh, technology just, you know, got so good and slaves weren't needed. No, slavery is free labor. Slavery is automation. It doesn't matter how good the technology is. You do not have to pay slaves. And it was ingrained in such a way because cotton was the most important commodity in the world at the time. And so the North, they invested in slavery. Banks in the North, people took out loans for slaves. His land was robbed and taken away. That land was speculated upon the same way that people speculate on stocks today. And the entrepreneurs at the time were slave owners who would then go out to that land, work the land, produce more money, products would be made. And a lot of the North's disdain for slavery was really more so their anger towards the arrogant cultural figureheads at the time. Because once slavery was abolished and you got into Reconstruction, wasn't that long before Northern white people were like, enough of this equality bullshit. You know, we got to be fiscally responsible. We spending too much money on these Negroes trying to help them out. Let's get away from that. And so, you know, I think that, you know, again, to just talk about anyone who made a stand, it was extremely difficult to rebel against the institution of slavery in any type of meaningful way. So like the people that we're talking about today, like you really have to think about their bravery. Like slavery it wasn't just something you could just fight against. You know what I'm saying? It was, without slavery, there would be no United States. It was the glue that kept the Union together because it allowed the country to expand. So, you know, all these people who we're talking about today really don't get enough credit for how brave they were.
Mm-hmm. And the automation you talked about, that's a great way to put it, because I've said before, in real terms, using all that automation, as you put it, I hadn't heard that before. That's a great way to put it. It screwed up all the other people who wanted to actually work and they couldn't get a job because all these robots were working, right, for free. So much for trickle down economics. Could have swore that worked. All right, so we'll go to we have two more of these little histories to go. Jackson, did you want to take? I don't know if you even got the message. Did you get it?
No, I don't know if I got it.
Okay, it might not have came through because I sent it while you're on the thing. All right, so I'll read the second one real quick here. This is a short one. Born into slavery in Georgia, Susie King Taylor lived on a plantation until being allowed to go live with her free grandmother. Despite Georgia's harsh laws prohibiting formal education for blacks, Susie attended 2 secret schools taught by black women and was also tutored by 2 abolitionist white youths. In 1862, Susie escaped slavery and fled to a Union gunboat off the southern Georgia coast, along with hundreds of other refugees. There at 14, under threat of death, she became the first black woman to openly educate blacks in Georgia. She then served as a nurse and for 4 years treated the wounded without pay. Her memoir made Susie the first and only African-American woman to publish an account of her experiences in the Civil War, which ended. What a wonderful revolution. In 1861, the Southern papers were full of advertisements for slaves, but now, despite all the hindrances and race problems, my people are striving to attain the full standard of other races born in free sight of God. And in a number of instances, we have succeeded. Justice, we ask, to be citizens of these United States, where so many of our people have shed their blood with their white comrades, that the stars and stripes should never be polluted. That is, again, Susie King Taylor. Pretty astonishing, you know, like Jackson said, the bravery under the threat of literal death, whipping, whatever it might be, for learning to read.
Mm-hmm.
Big Haas, you got one more. This one is a well-known person, but we don't always know this part of it. So give us this part, Haas.
All right. Under the more you know segment, check this out. Harriet Tubman is widely remembered for leading slaves to freedom via the Underground Railroad. If that wasn't risky enough, she had a lesser-known job during the Civil War, serving as a spy under the employ of the U.S. Secret Service. She used the money paid to her to recruit other blacks to supply her with information. Turns out, blacks made great spies and were key in keeping the tide of the war in favor of the Union. Why were they such good spies? Well, white Southerners so underestimated them, something that still endures today, that they became invisible. Confederate military leaders fed incredible amounts of information to these eavesdroppers as they arrogantly discussed war strategies and attack plans right in front of their slaves. They either assumed slaves were effectively conditioned into total submission, get out, lacked the cognitive aptitude to understand complex conversation, or both. This information was routinely siphoned back to Tubman, who herself delivered it to the Union, being so precise as to give the exact locations of where rebels had planted torpedoes in the harbor. Tubman also assisted Union Colonel James Montgomery by leading covert military operations, going so far as to free 700 enslaved blacks in a single raid, burning a rebel port to the ground, and winning the battle with exactly 0 casualties. That's a phenomenal woman right there.
Absolutely.
Yep. Jackson, let's give you center stage here. I'd like to get your thoughts on how does this resonate? Whoop. Let's move you over there. Sorry, Haas. There we go. Take you out of there. How does this resonate with you? Put this in context of today. We learned a lot about Harriet Tubman in school, but we only learn, about the Underground Railroad part. How does the rest strike you, and how do you think that impacts our politics?
I think the rest is a good example of, a half of a story that's never told. The other side of the story that people don't really want to look at, kind of how I pointed back to before, how slavery is typically, thought of as just this old evil Southern tradition. Well, it greatly minimizes what Harriet Tubman did, because it kind of makes it seem like she just kind of snuck in there and gathered people together and brought them in. But again, this was the economic engine and the glue of the Union at the time. All of the decisions that slave owners made were money driven. And so that was one of the biggest reasons why it was so difficult to rebel at all, because people were constantly being moved and shipped here, shipped there. After the Atlantic slave trade stopped bringing new slaves into the United States in 1807, slavery just adapted into kind of like a breeding program, and people were moved and walked all over the country like cattle. So that makes it hard to rebel. That makes it hard to organize. That makes it hard to bond with people, because you're constantly in this state of not just depression, but you're in so much emotional anxiety that you can't really connect with the world in any type of meaningful way, because you're nothing. And you have to give everything you can just to be innovative enough to survive.
I was just going to say, like, constant survival mode.
Yeah, and when you're in constant survival mode, you can't really group with one another. You couldn't read, you know what I'm saying? Like, and this was enforced through violence, and that's what people overlook. Like, slavery was an unbelievably violent institution,
right?
And it was repeated and repeated and repeated. And again, so you look at, but again, that could help. That made them overlook the fact that there were people listening and eavesdropping. The slaves knew everything about what they were doing. They knew all their business. They knew all their secrets. They knew all their affairs. And so it was easy to overlook the fact that, people like Harriet were able to create a spy network in such a way because they were so dehumanized. They were assumed to not be able to do anything like that. But again, that's the half of the story that really puts into perspective how brave and courageous and legendary this woman really is, because she was fighting against God, basically, in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? Like, her and everyone else. The only successful large-scale slave rebellion in history was Haiti. And they still ain't been shown no love. You know what I mean?
They were paying. They were paying. They got their freedom. They got their free liberation from France, but they weren't really liberated because they had to pay France. And I think they only recently stopped paying France, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, not just that, but I mean, they were completely blockaded from any type of meaningful connection to the Western Hemisphere as soon as they did get their freedom.
Right.
So, they just continuously been blocked off. So again, people like Kanye West, who, that sound like a decision to me, like a choice. You just like, nah, like people were always trying to break out. They were always trying to fight against it. And
he'd never heard of Nat Turner, and he never heard of one of the reasons the whole term white was created in the first place was because impoverished whites and slaves were getting together and causing uprisings among on plantations and things like that. So they're like, we gotta break them up. We gotta break them up and stratify them and elevate those poor whites just enough so they can look down their nose at the people that they were bonding with.
Slavery was such a powerful institution that this country went to war over it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know what I mean? Like that, because again, that's really how people need to think about slave labor. It's automation. You do not have to pay these people.
Right. It's basically like human robots.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is.
Because you don't have to pay them. You barely house them. You give them scraps and spoiled foods to the point where they create amazing seasoning in order to palate, to be able to palate to be able to eat what you're giving them, and now it's like a delicacy when we talk about soul food. But when you go back to the roots of it, it was, we got to put something on this because it's rancid. Mm-hmm. We have to eat it, but we got to put something on it because it is rancid. And that is the origin of soul food. And people don't even understand that, Mm-hmm. It's so interesting to me that so many people will say it was about states' rights. And I'll say, finish the sentence. And they'll say, what do you mean? I'm like, states' rights to what? That's right.
Own human beings.
Own slaves. And I say, so you never read the Cornerstone speech? You never read that speech and what he said in there? That what was the cornerstone of their rebellion? What was the
Articles of Secession for almost
every state,
almost all but one.
Mm-hmm.
And one didn't give it, and that's why it wasn't there. But like that the first two were explicit in their saying, hey, the white man is superior.
Exactly.
Or these types of things that we can't even fathom today, that people go back and try to whitewash. And this is like, I posted on Facebook earlier today. What you are seeing today is not rewriting history.
No.
It is rewriting history books.
Yeah.
By
telling
adding
the
actual history.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
The previous volume or previous edition, volume 3.6,
had been heavily redacted.
Incomplete.
Yeah.
Right.
Heavily redacted.
So because you didn't get taught it in 8th grade government class does not mean that it was there. There are some areas where I can understand where people think it's being rewritten because, like, we have Columbus Day coming up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Columbus was painted a hero. We never heard a fucking thing about Columbus that was negative until we got into our 30s.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
then
I had my grandmothers on both sides were teachers, so I heard a little bit about that way before. You know, because we
but
didn't
you
celebrate
understand,
Columbus Day at our house.
we're not talking about the elites like you. We're talking about the general public, okay? So but the point, but like, so like the first time that I heard it, I was like, you know, you have all this past history that comes in your head. So I understand the initial reaction sometimes from people, like the doubt, like, yeah, well, he might have done some bad shit, but he was still like a hero, still like a good guy. It's still important to cover him. And like, but as you learn more, you start to shy away from that. And you're like, I mean, maybe he wasn't the worst human being ever born, but is he really worth celebrating on this particular level?
Right.
For doing nothing except sitting in the most luxurious cabin of the boat that he had chartered under the order of Queen Isabella.
Yeah.
Right.
And discovering a land where a bunch of people already live.
The Vikings, some Africans are said to have gone to South America, perhaps, probably not North
look
America,
at the statues that they unearthed. You think this nose shows up in Mexico and other South American countries out of nowhere on tattoo,
yes.
on statues, these
on big tattooing?
Yeah. Tortuga.
Well, even at that, I mean, most of human history, the written language didn't exist. You know what I'm saying? So the majority of human history is completely undocumented. We've been around for quite some time.
Right.
Written history only goes back maybe 7,000 years.
Yeah,
and then civilization is only, and civilization was birthed from agriculture, which only goes back about 15,000 years.
Which started where?
What, agriculture?
Around the Nile River is the first.
That's exactly right.
Very first proven areas where agriculture started, and the reason why it started there was because the Nile floods.
Yes.
Which made irrigation basically natural, and people congregated to that particular area. So
it happened every year, and yeah, exactly. It happened
like
every
clockwork.
year. And that's what agriculture is, what allowed people to settle. You know what I mean, and not have to move around constantly. So again, like just to laughing at the whole like he discovered this part of the world. Like, people were there for over a good 20,000 plus years before that made over there. So
All right, so there, Haas, your closing thought on the Emancipation Proclamation, then we'll move on to Haiti. Or not Haiti, but the Haitians.
Yes. Well, the Emancipation Proclamation was a hugely important thing, but some things to take from that were, as you read, Dutch, Abraham Lincoln was hesitant to do it, and then when he did, he didn't do it fully. That was for Southern enslaved people, not those enslaved in the North. And also, you'd be remiss if you didn't mention what the Emancipation Proclamation birthed. It birthed the 13th Amendment. And in that was the little loophole that allows slavery to continue.
Which is why you needed the 14th and 15th Amendments.
Right. Because then you had the loophole there unless they're prisoners. As I paraphrase.
Doesn't it astonish you guys that and this is definitely not true of all Republicans, and it's certainly not true of Democrats either in a lot of ways, but the people that I interact with on the left, and as Jackson, you don't know this, but I was a Republican up until 2015 when Trump came down the elevator, and I immediately left the party. And finding out that you're wrong about some things it's humbling, right? Like, so there are some things that I still think, and there are some, but like 80% of it is like at least moved halfway, if not all the way to the left, like on universal health care. You really can't be more pro universal health care than I am. But isn't it amazing that when you put things, Jackson, into context of the Constitution, how these Constitution lovers on the right really don't even know anything about the document whatsoever.
I think that reflects back into the conversation on, the religious zealots that we have. It's just whatever their idea that makes them feel good, that makes them feel safe, that makes them feel powerful and above is linked to their divine truth. And so it doesn't, like whether that's the Constitution or local laws or anything, whatever puts them in a winning position is they're ordained right by God. And it's really all the same game.
Are you at all religious?
I'm not religious. I grew up in the church, and I kind of went through a period where I was like, it's all bullshit. And I've evolved from there. I'm a very, collective minded, everything is. I'm very aware that we're in a very large, there's a lot more going on than us, without me going on and on. But I wouldn't say I'm religious in any type of real way, but I definitely don't think that there's like no meaning in anything. I think that the universe is very much alive.
Right.
Cool.
I like that. I agree with that.
I agree with that as well. I'm just jumping on the bandwagon here today.
This is as agreeable as Dutch has been in months.
I don't have Mikey here to argue with. So let's do a little bit before we go into Haiti. I want to make sure we get to our second game. So let's find where the heck did I put this at here? So we're gonna play another game with our new friend Jackson here, who of course is going to make it so that I take over for Cenk Uyghur. I will be your new power broker on the Young Turks. But we're gonna play our next game.
Kind of looks like Jay Leno a little bit.
Cenk Uyghur.
Yeah, it does.
I've never heard that, but I can see it a little bit.
A little. Just not. He doesn't. His face isn't as long as
the Turkish Jay Leno.
You're right.
So we're gonna play a game with you, Jackson. You've heard of Fuck One, Marry One, Kill One. We don't play that here because we can't talk about killing or fucking people. So we play Prank One, Marry One, Snap One. So what you will do is you can prank call one, you can marry one as normal, and then you can snap one away like Thanos, but they're not dead. They're just out of existence, and they can be brought back by the Hulk. The Hulk can bring them back with another snap.
Yes.
So, all right. Lauren Boebert.
Wow. You gave him another one to snap.
You started out with that one.
You don't know. He might go with Marjorie Taylor. I'm going with Marjorie Taylor Greene for my second one.
Okay. All right. I will go Mary J. Blige.
What? You are horrible at this game.
What?
Okay. You're supposed to make it hard.
Okay, Candace Owens. How about that?
Okay, there you go. Now it's hard.
Now we're making
Now Lauren Boebert.
Yeah. And Marjorie Taylor Greene. So you got Candace Owens, you got Marjorie Taylor Greene, and you got Lauren Boebert. Got him.
I think oh God. Okay.
See, this is how it's supposed to be.
Hey,
okay.
Okay, let's see. I'm gonna have to go with, since I'm dealing with these three. Candace gotta go. Because she just gotta go because she's a Black woman doing what she does. So she extra gets no love.
No picnic for her.
No. Marjorie gets the prank call, and Lauren, I guess I would marry her between the three because she's
Is she the most sane out of the three to you?
No, she's not the most sane, but she's, I guess, if I'm dealing with three crazy women, I would have to go with the one that I find the most attractive, and I would say it's her.
She is definitely a beautiful woman, and her brain is not.
No, it's not. In an ideal world, in the real world, I would not choose any of those three.
Those three would get.
But if we had to go with those,
no, you don't get to back off it like that.
Candace,
no backing off. You just proposed to Lauren Boebert live on Dig on America.
We put it in the Instagram.
We sending that one right to Richard, right to Dr. Richie.
Oh man,
brother,
that's gonna be a toxic relationship right there, man.
Could you deconvert her?
Be no good.
Lots of hate sex, I guess.
You think you could deconvert her?
No, I think she's too far gone. I think she's too old. I think she's gonna be like that forever.
Forever.
Forever. Yeah. Yeah,
All right.
she's done.